Massive disclaimer. If you take this game as seriously as a national emergency every single time you play and demand that every piece of content revolving around it be just as serious, you're definitely going to want to find another video. If you think you look like this while you play Escape from Tarkov, this definitely isn't the place for you. If this is what you think you look like when you play Tarkov, well then welcome, come on in. You know, I'd say one of the best pistols to start with, probably the Glock 17. Fairly solid weapon, does the job, especially if you get some somewhat decent ammo in her. She'll treat you right. B tier. Followed up by the Glock 18. Now, Glock 18, I'm not personally a fan of, but I cannot deny that it is an incredibly effective killing machine if you rock 50 round magazines and just spray for whatever the heck you want. A tier. And this leads me to my favorite pistol to run because, I mean, SS-190 is a great bullet. You get 20 of the things. If you aim for face shields, you'll kill them every time. If you shoot them in the chest, you'll get them most of the time as well. 5.7 is S tier. Now we're gonna kind of cover some of the lesser known ones. You know, the Glock, D tier. It exists as the starter pistol if you use it for anything else. P226R. Same exact thing. D tier. Why would you ever use this past the start? Like, seriously, it's the Glock except for USEC. Then we jump on up to the APB. You know, this gun has its fans. It has its quirks. I'm not personally one of them. I just think it can be fun to run sometimes, but I would never unironically use this thing for protection. D tier. And another gun, you know, the Tokarev, the TT, B tier. For one reason, war crimes. Enough said. PM, gonna drop it right down just below the Tokarev at C tier. Pretty solid at committing war crimes, but not quite as proficient as the TT, hasn't been around as long. Speaking of pistols that have been around a long time, we're gonna jump on over to, you know, America's favorite pistol, the Colt 1911. S tier. Yeah, S tier. We are pissing people off today. Speaking of pissing people off, holy crap, I've never used the shrimp before, the SR1MP or something, whatever like that. But for whatever reason, people were having a cow when I said, you know, I haven't really used this pistol, but I'm going to put it down here because I've never used it before, so we're just going to put, apparently it belongs, you know, shooting through the ceiling, because holy crap, I put that thing in like B tier or something like that. It might have been C tier. Maybe it was D tier, I really don't remember. And that was some scary stuff going on in the comment section, I'll tell you what. So yeah, SR1MP, I hear you angry commenters. You can put down your pitchforks and torches, please. I don't want to die. S tier. Are you happy now? M9A3. I love the pistol in real life, very fun to shoot, great in other games. In this one, not so much. F tier. I hate this thing. And finally, we got the Colt M45A1. You know, 45 ACP, variant of the 1911. Yeet! 1911 is the way to go. Now that all the people who mainline Red Bull into their veins through an IV when they play this game are gone, and it's just a bunch of, you know, meme lords that are left, we're gonna jump on over to the shotguns, my personal favorite category. Mossberg 590A1 and Remington 870. I'm gonna rope them together, and this is gonna piss off the gun community, because I view them as effectively the same thing. Both of them go into D tier because in this game, pumps are stupid and really shouldn't be used past the beginning of the wipe. Unless you're some kind of, you know, shotgun Buddha, which you have my respect. I knew a guy who got, you know, Shooter Born in Heaven done with these things. No freaking idea how, but he did. So I'm gonna put them in D tier. You know, if you like them, you like them. That's cool with me. That's cool with you. They're shotguns. Welcome to the family. MP133, I think we can all agree, is a pretty solid E tier, with the lowest modularity of any of the shotguns, and really the only thing they're ever used for is that damn starter quest. I really think we can all agree they're pretty low on the tier list. The Taz. This is a coalescent being, my dear boy, because holy crap, does it go from E tier to, you know, S tier and flip-flop back and forth. I honestly don't know where to put this because it is both the greatest meme shotgun of all time and the worst weapon in Escape from Tarkov all at the same time. So you know what? We're just gonna put it right over there somewhere. I don't know where it ended up, but, you know, it has transcended this dimension. We'll leave it at that. Jumping up to the MP153, I'm gonna put it in... I would say it's between B tier and A tier. The only thing holding this weapon back is, you know, if you don't kill him in the first 8 shots, or maybe you do kill him in the first 8 shots, and they have a buddy, well, you're punting shells down that little tube for quite a while, so that kind of holds it back a little bit for me, but this thing is a very nice shotgun to run. 7.5 out of 10 would operate with. Gonna put it right between B and A tier. Then we have the KS-23. Hee, just leg people and shoot them in the stomach. Yes, we get it. Please, as a person who loves shotguns, stop with the just sheer stupidity that is this weapon. All right, A tier. Oh, it should be an S. No, it's my list. Go away. S tier, the Saiga 12. I might be a tad bit biased because once again, this thing did kind of jumpstart my channel, but I made an entire video on why I love this thing, so go and watch it if you haven't already, and you'll hear the entirety of my spiel in that video. Hasn't changed one bit. Love this weapon, love it to bits. Flechettes are a WMD. This thing is terrifying. It's a great gun, S tier. Next, let's head on to the DMR classification of weapons. SR25. Personally, I think this thing was a bit overhyped. I see streamers using it all the time. I'm not really sure why. I've never particularly taken a liking to it. However, when I started to use it for the DMR user video, yeah, it was pretty fun to use. It did the job. It was solid. It gets a nice, solid B. Definitely not, you know, worthy of praise, but definitely not something to overlook. Then we're gonna head on over to the SVDS. I love this weapon so much. Words cannot describe how much I love this weapon. Putting 20 round magazines in this thing and just running through factory or labs. Like seriously, when I first started running labs, this thing was all I brought, and I was dropping kids with HKs and they were getting so pissed off. They added me afterwards. They called me names. It was a grand old time. SVDS, A tier. Then we have the RSAS. I view this weapon as entirely unnecessary. Like, you know, sure, it's cool, and sometimes it's a good weapon, but I can never really get the recoil down on this thing, and the ergonomics I really don't find a huge benefit from, so unless I'm missing something, this weapon really isn't worth a much higher price when compared to an SR25 or an M1A, so it's gonna drop into C tier. It does the job, it's good at sniping, but I ultimately don't see the need to spend extra money on this thing. And then we're gonna head on over to the SKSs. I'm gonna put them in C tier. They're cheap, they get the job done. If you load them with BP, they're pretty darn solid weapons, and especially early wipe, these things are wonderful, and if you just want to run around and farm with an incredibly solid weapon that's like the cheapest darn thing on the planet, these are your go-to weapons. OP SKS, I'm going to say, is slightly better than the standard SKS, but both of them I would happily operate with C tier. And now we're going to go with what everyone says is the rat's most coveted weapon, the Vepr Hunter. You can be over there with the Colt M45A1. I hate that gun. I don't understand the hype around it, and I don't understand why everyone claims it's, you know, the be-all, end-all of rat superiority. Just spend an extra 10K and get an M1A. Seriously. There's no point in using that thing. Oh, you can mod it with, you know, a better stock and a suppressor. Yeah, the suppressor is at minimum 60K, and the stock doesn't even do too much. So yeah, banished to the realm of Colt M45A1 derivative and unnecessary. Moving on. And then we're going to move on over to the M1A. Boy, I love this weapon. It's probably one of the few guns that can actually compete with my love of the SVD. This thing is incredible. First of all, it's the great-great-grandson of the M1 Grand. Like, immediate bonus points right there. Also, it has a 50-round magazine, hits like a truck, has very little recoil considering what you're shooting with it, and you can mod it out the wazoo and make it either, you know, a sniper or something that you rush and shove down people's throats. This weapon is awesome, and I don't know why Pestily put it in D tier. A tier. Can't put it in S though, because S is reserved for very specific things. Like the Mark 18, this thing is just terrifying. When you are literally called Mjolnir, and the sound of each gunshot is like a clap of thunder. You know you're holding some awesome. This is probably the only gun in the game that can actually intimidate me just from the gunshot, so I believe that deserves some recognition. S tier. Now, to the distant relatives of the DMR user, we have the bolt actions. We're gonna start with the T5000. Where do I begin with this weapon? Much like Supreme t-shirts, this thing is completely overpriced for being functionally the same as literally everything else. This thing drops way down to F tier. Then we're gonna have the SV98 resting right about its C tier. It's not a terrible gun, it gets the job done, and oh yes, I know it's cheaper than the Mosin and they got rid of the trigger delay, but for some reason I yield animosity towards this weapon, and since this is my tier list, it's going in the C tier. The Mosin, however, will be going into the B tier. First of all, it is the Mosin. Like, come on, what are you gonna do? Get angry at it? Been around since what, 1898? The garbage rod's still kicking. What, you're gonna trash on it? You're gonna go to the retirement home and yell at all the old people there? No, you're gonna respect it. The Mosin is gonna chill right at a solid B tier. I love this gun, even though I'm not very good with it, but I respect it. Now we're gonna slip on up to the DVL-10 and the M700. I give these both the nice solid rank of A tier. I would say the M700 probably skirts out in front of the DVL-10 just a slight bit, but I love the DVL-10. Back before the M62 nerf, just putting M62 in this thing and just plinking heads at incredible ranges was so much fun, especially when you just watch that bullet travel. So it's gonna sit at A tier. Unfortunately, they nerfed M62. You don't get that satisfying trail, but you know, M61 and M993 exist, so go crazy with the DVL. M700, solid weapon. It sounds really loud for some reason, even with the suppressor, even though it's really not. So that's why it's not going to get an S tier, is my own personal pet peeve of whenever I shoot this thing, I think I'm giving my position away to literally everyone, including the people in Scotland. But, you know, it does the job, and it's very proficient at it, so it will rest right next to the DVL-10 at A tier. Oh yeah, and then there's the VPO 215. Honestly, I completely forgot about this thing. I have no idea. Put it wherever the hell you want. I'm just gonna close my eyes and kind of toss it at this thing, because I know that if I put it in A tier or S tier, I'm gonna piss off a ton of people. If I put it in E tier or F tier, I'm gonna piss off a whole lot of other people. So we're just gonna shut our eyes and... Okay, cool. C tier. That's where it gets to be. Guess we averaged it out. Alright, now we're going to move on over to the SMGs and pistol caliber carbines. STM-9. This thing is just an overpriced Saiga 9. It's going to go into E tier, and I know that pisses a lot of people off. Unfortunately, I don't actually have a thing for it since I'm just using Pestely's old tier list, so pretend there's an STM-9 that just got placed right here, okay? Then we're going to move on to the STM-9's older brother, the one who's been around a bit longer, who isn't as cool looking, but is also a lot cheaper. The Saiga 9. This thing is, I mean, as a combat weapon, it's not great. But if the only reason that I'm gonna bump it up quite a bit is because of the fact that this thing is so incredibly awesome to take with you on rat runs. Let's say you want a pistol, but you really don't like pistol recoil, just take this thing. Has 30 shots in it, it's the easiest thing in the world to control, and it, like, later in the wipe, they go for like 10k. So yeah, we're gonna toss it straight up into B tier because it deserves it. This thing's awesome. And then we're gonna move on over to the other weapons. UMP-45, yeah, cool. UMP-45, some people claim it's slept on. I think that its slow firing rate and the lack of a really good armor-piercing ammo makes it that it really just can't compete with other weapons, so it is going to get dumped straight into D tier. PPSH-41. I'm not really a big fan of this weapon, but I can understand the draw for some people, so we'll put it at C tier, because why not? The PP-19. The Saiga 9's fully automatic cousin. C tier. It's okay, it gets the job done, but it's ultimately not necessary and better options exist. The PP91 and the other PP91. Yeah, those things can go in D tier because I really don't care for them that much. You might think they're fantastic weapons and that's up to you, but this is my tier list and they're gonna go in right about D tier. The MPX and the MP5. This one's kind of sad for me because when 7N31 was first introduced, it was so cheap. And you could load up a 50-round magazine in each of these things and just go out and have a great old time. And then the Vector got introduced, and 7N31 skyrocketed through the darn roof, and now these things, you really can't use them that much unless you're willing to blow millions of rubles on ammo that's ultimately subpar. So, yeah, unfortunately, these things are going to go in B tier. They used to be higher, but with the skyrocketing price of 7N31, I can't raise them any higher in good conscience. Speaking of which, the Vector 9x19. Yeah, this thing belongs in S tier, but I hate it for the sole value of what it represents. They nerfed the AS Val and the VSS because they were too good and were too utilized by everyone, and then added this thing. Now we're going to talk about the Vector variant that I actually like, and that is the 45 ACP Vector. I made an entire video about why I love this thing, so I won't go too much into detail, but this thing should be the most criminally overused weapon in the game, and yet it's not. So if you're cool with 30-round magazines, give this thing a try. I love it. In a very similar philosophy, the MP9N. This thing absolutely shreds. This thing is absolutely terrifying. This weapon is ludicrously underrated because, once again, the Vector exists and everyone and their mother, for some reason, needs those extra 20 rounds to kill people. You really don't with this thing. This thing is phenomenal, it kills super fast, and it's pretty darn cheap. S tier. And finally, we're going to wrap up the SMGs with, the MP7A1 and A2. These are both incredibly solid weapons that I enjoy quite a bit. FMJSX is solid and APSX is terrifying. S tier. Okay, real talk. Has anyone even seen this weapon since after it was pretty much stricken from the marked rooms? Like, this thing is an extinct species, man. This thing is gone from Tarkov. So for that reason, it's gonna be an F because it's ludicrously expensive and it's good, but I would prefer to just have, any other gun in this thing. So, yeah, F tier. And we're gonna wrap things up here with the assault rifles. The semi-automatic AKs, the VPO 136 and the 366 variant. I mean, yeah, they do the job early in the wipe, but you're going to want to abandon them pretty much as soon as you get access to better weaponry because, they do the job, but ultimately they are just outperformed by other weapons. So they're going to rest at E tier. AKM and the AKS-74U. A similar story. They do the job early wipe and they are excellent for, I guess, the AKS-74U is excellent for rat running, it's excellent early wipe, and the AKM is an excellent weapon early wipe. But, yeah, you're going to want to leave these behind pretty much as soon as you can to get better weaponry, so they're going to rest easy and nice at D tier. Then there's the AK-105. Yeah, this thing exists, it's just a longer version of the AKS-74U, but a shorter version of the AK-74M. So I really don't see a need for this thing. Really don't understand why it's here, and you can get an AK-74M for, I think, cheaper. So yeah, I really don't use this weapon. This thing can go into banishment along with the rest of the weapons that I've casted into oblivion. This is an odd one, the AK-101-102. I really had no expectations for this thing. I mean, it's a 5.56 AK. Why would you use that? There's better options available. But when I use this thing, I was pretty good with it. It does its job, it functions well. So we're gonna leave it at C tier. Not bad, not great, but worthwhile if you want to check it out. Then we're gonna move on up to the AK-74. I love this weapon. It's going to S tier. It's just a good solid gun. Oh, I love this gun. It goes in S tier. Accompanying the AK-74 and an S tier is the AK-103. The AK-104, I don't know why it's the same image. They're completely different guns. AK-104 belongs in F tier or in banishment along with the AK-105. There's really no point in using the AK-104. The AK-103, however, I love this gun so much. Packs a wallop. You can get it to decently low recoil, and bullets are incredible, and they're like half the price of M995. I know they don't pack quite the amount of penetrating power, but they get the job done incredibly well. That's the definition of these two AKs. Gets the job done, gets it done well. So both of them are deserving of their rank of S tier. Then there's the RPK. I ultimately see it as a more expensive and practically completely identical thing to the AK-74. Sure, it has a few minor changes here and there that make it technically better in some ways, but I don't know, I just don't really feel this weapon, so it's gonna rest at B tier. Gets the job done, solid weapon, not my thing. I prefer the AK-74. Then we have the AS Val and the VSSs. These things were my bread and butter back in the day. I don't want to sound like one of those people, but man, I was using these things before all the people just kind of flooded on over to using them. And that's why I'm just so disappointed that they got nerfed. Why? They shouldn't be 200,000 rubles. They shouldn't have that much recoil. They shouldn't have more than 60 recoil even when fully modded. Like, I understand a lot of people were using them, but that's just because they were good. The subsonic ammo is the biggest deterrent for using these things. They didn't need that nerf, so I can't put them at S tier, but I will put them at a very deserving A tier. I love these guns. I wish they would return them to their former glory, but you know, whatever. Next, we're gonna move on over to the bullpups. DTMDR. Sure, it can go in B tier. It gets the job done. I don't particularly understand why a lot of people kind of like this weapon and then they completely trash on the AK-101 and 102. I mean, I guess modding is basically non-existent on these things. You don't need to mod them practically at all. But the AK-101 and AK-102s aren't very different from that. So, I don't know, but DTMDR I will put at a B tier solely because it needs less modding. But if you love the DTMDR, you love that thing, really recommend picking up an AK-101. It was enjoyable. Next, we're going to talk about the RFB. Yeah, this weapon is not good. I don't understand. Like, sure, it's a rat's weapon. Sure, it's cheap. Sure, it fires 308, and sure, it can be unlocked pretty early in the wipe. Yeah, I really just don't see the draw for this thing. I don't understand it, so that's why it goes into E tier. I mean, if I see one, maybe I'll pick it up. It can do the job, but I'm just not a fan. So it will go into E tier for me. Don't worry, I didn't forget the DTMDR 308 variant. Basically just a better version of the DTMDR. It's fantastic. It fires 308 and it's everyone's favorite sweat weapon, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It just shows that this thing performs pretty solidly, so I believe it's deserving of a spot in A tier. And next we have the Ash 12. Now you might be saying, oh, but the Ash 12's recoil is so incredibly excessive, it's practically unusable. I mean, semi-auto exists, doesn't it? And this thing hits like a darn freight train anyways. You just tap a few rounds at a guy's relative direction and you're bound to hit either a limb or the chest or the head or anything, and whatever you hit is getting blown out the backside and ain't coming back. So yeah, use this thing. And on full auto mode, all you gotta do is point it in the rough direction of an enemy and pull the trigger and have faith that DACA will reign supreme. S tier. Now we're gonna move on to everyone's favorite AR-15 platform rifles. First, we're gonna start with the AR-215. I love this gun. I love it so much. It's an incredible weapon, and if you disagree with me, well, then we're just not gonna see eye to eye. So I'm gonna put it at a nice, solid B tier. Following up the AR is the TX-15. Okay, this is easily one of the best looking weapons in the game. So if I am rich as heck, I will run this thing and I will cheese the heck out of it. I will mod it out and get it to just be ludicrously good from a stats perspective. But from a gameplay perspective, there's really not much of a difference between using this thing and an ADAR. So, you know, if you want to use the TX15, that's fine, man. Go for it. But ultimately, I'm going to be sticking with my guy, the ADAR. So this thing can drop right on down to D tier. Then we have the M4. As far as weapons go in this game, I would say this thing is just the dictionary definition of versatile. You got enemies pretty far away from you? Okay, you might be able to hit them. If you got a 2x on it, bam, you have the most well-rounded weapon in the game because it can hit far targets, it can shred near targets, in between targets are also pretty easy to dispatch. M4 is a solid weapon and is deserving of its slot at A tier. Then we're going to jump on over to the HK416. I think I am, by law, required to put this thing at S tier. I personally never use it. I don't know why, I just don't use it, but you know, sure, S tier. Incredibly solid weapon, there you go, S tier. Jumping over to the M4 variant that I love to use is the MCX. With ammo that is almost the same exact price as M855A1 and is literally just a direct upgrade to it, I don't know, I just love this gun so much, and unless they shadow nerf the AP ammo, this thing is easily my go-to AR-15 variant, S tier. And then we have the juice cannon. What can I say about it? It's the SA-58. It hits like a truck, it's full auto, and you can get it down to pretty reasonable recoil, and it is more than deserving of its spot at S tier. Oh yeah, and a few other things I have to mention. CMMG Mutant, yeah, that goes up there too. MP155, I don't know where it's gonna go because I haven't used it at all. This is an outdated list, this is Pestely's old list, so CMMG Mutant, put it wherever you wish. MP155, put it wherever you wish. I don't even remember if there's anything else that got added, but you know, whatever. This is the completed tier list. Hope you enjoyed watching. Thank you so much for watching all to the end. And with all that out of the way, thank you so much for watching. And go read about the Franz Stigler and Charlie Brown incident in World War II. It's a really, really interesting story.